Good day, everybody. I hope that you're well. And I also hope that you are having a good day so far. All right. So today we're doing our grade 6 English lesson on figurative language. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. All right. We said we're doing a grade 6 English lesson on figurative languages. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. Once we've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of English language arts. We're doing grade 6. All right. Sorry. So when it comes to figurative language, right? So our chapter that we are focusing on today is figurative language. So we are logging on to aplusstudents.ca and we are scrolling through to this chapter of figurative language. Our subject is English language arts. We're doing grade 6. And in the lessons that we are going to be focusing on under our chapter of figurative language. All right. So we're going to classify figures of speech and interpret figures of speech. So when it comes to a figure of speech, right? A figure of speech, it is words or phrases that use languages or use language in a non-literal or unusual way. When we say non-literal, then it means that it's not like if I say something and then you need to directly take whatever the response is. So remember we said a figure of speech, it is words or phrase that use language in a non-literal way. And we say a non-literal way, meaning that literal is like saying that it happened directly as I'm telling you. But when we say non-literal way, then it means that it's not directly, physically, or whatever as I say it is. Right? So now if we look at one of our figures of speech, right? We have alliteration. And with alliteration, alliteration is the repetition of sounds at the beginning of the nearby words. So it's like you are repeating the same sounds. And if we look at an example of a figure of alliteration, an example of alliteration, right, which is a repetition of sound, it says, "What a lucky lady you are." So, what a lucky lady you are. All right. So that is alliteration. It is a repetition of sounds, like sounds that is being repeated. And that is mainly at the beginning of nearby words. Then we have allusion. And an allusion is a brief reference to something or someone well known. And we can say that often it is from history or literature, meaning it was many years ago. And if we look at an example, it says, remember we said that we have alliteration, which is the repetition of sounds. And then we have an allusion, which is a brief reference, and that is to something or someone well known. So an allusion, it is a brief reference to something or someone that is well known. And mainly or most times it is maybe from the past or it is from literature. And if we look at an example, right, then it says, I better get home before I turn into a pumpkin, Leela remarked. So I better go home before I turn into a pumpkin, Leela remarked. All right, so this is but a few examples of figurative expressions, right? And when we say figurative expressions, we also say figurative languages. It is a word or a phrase that use language in a non-literal or unusual way. Non-literal. All right. So also when it comes to figures of speech, as much as they use words in a literal or let's say non-literal or unusual way, all right, so we know alliteration, which is a repetition of sound, as well as allusion, which is a brief reference to something or someone well known. All right, so now we're going to aplusstudents.ca and we're going to classify figures of speech. So we're going to classify different types of figures of speech. All right. We went over what a figure of speech is, and we said a figure of speech is a word or phrase that use language in a non-literal way. And remember, when we say words in a non-literal way, right, then you cannot directly take whatever that we are saying and believe it is true, or we take that as is and it is just like that. No, because with figures of speech, it uses words or phrases that use language in a non-literal literal or an unusual way. All right, so now we're going to personification. And personification is giving human characteristics to a non human thing. All right. If we look at an example of personification, it says the trees danced in the wind. All right. So now, oopsie, we're going to go over a few things, and then we are going to a test where we are going to figure out figures of speech, what personification is, what is illusion. All right. And remember, once again, we said that figures of speech, it is basically just, it's like we just using words or phrases that use language in a non-literal way. And we said personification is giving human characteristics to a non-living thing. All right. So we see that when it comes to some of the figures of speech, right? Remember, we're not taking something literal. We are just taking something that we think the person is saying. That is more of a figurative expression. All right. And remember, an illusion. All right. So now we are going to, before we go on to our test, remember figures of speech, we said it's words or phrases that has a non-literal meaning. Okay, let's go to our little activity. It says, what does the personification in the text suggest? Personification. It says, the trawler plunged into the angry swells of the dark, furious sea. The trawler plunged into the angry swells of the dark, furious sea. We need to basically say what the personification in the text is. And personification is giving human characteristics to a non human thing. So the trawler plunged into the angry swells of the dark, furious sea. So we now need to basically choose the correct words that tells us what the personification is. That's giving human characteristics to a non-human thing. And if we were to say what the personification is within the text, all right, and when we choose the sentence of what the personification of the sentence suggests, then we can say that the sea was fierce. So the sea was fierce. If it says it was angry and furious, right? So if it says it was angry and furious, the sea, then it basically tells us the sea was fierce. All right. So we see that the words that we think it means is that the sea was fierce because we have words like angry and furious, and that is basically words that describes how the sea was. Okay, what's a simile? A simile. It says what does a simile in the text mean? When Lee Mellon finished the apple, he smashed his lips together like a pair of cymbals. If we were to find out what a simile is, it is also a figure of speech and it basically compares one thing to the other thing. So we basically comparing one thing to the other thing and we use the word as. So it says when Lee Mellon finished the apple, he smacked his lips together like a pair of cymbals. So we said similes are comparisons between two or more things. Here it says, when Millen finished his apple, he smacked his lips together like a pair of cymbals. So now we need to say, what does the simile in the text suggest? All right. So now we're going to our test where we are going to interpret figures of a speech. It says, what does the personification in this text suggest? Personification in this text. What does it suggest? And remember, personification, it is a literal device that gives human characteristics to something that isn't human like. All right. And we said with personification, the trawler plunged into the angry swells of the dark, furious sea. We need to find the personification in the text, which is a little device that gives human characteristics to something that isn't human. Is it option one, the sea took revenge on the trawler? And if we were to find the personification of within that sentence, then we can say it's option one. Took the sea took revenge on the trawler. Oh, sorry. It is actually the sea was fierce. I apologize. It is option two. I took the wrong one. All right, that was the wrong one that I chose, but I apologize. What does the verbal irony in the text suggest? A verbal irony. And a verbal irony, firstly, right? It is where a speaker intentionally says something that's different from the reality of the situation. So it says the salsa could use a little more spice. Yoshi said as he gulped down water and wiped tears from his eyes. So, verbal irony, which is where a speaker intentionally says something that is different from the reality of the situation. Does it mean that the salsa was tasteless because it says the salsa could use a little more spice? Does it mean the salsa was tasteless? Or do we say option two, the salsa was too spicy? All right. So if it says that the salsa could use a little more spice, Yoshi said as he gulped down water and wiped tears from his eyes. So we must choose the correct option, either option one, the salsa was tasteless, or option two, the salsa was too spicy. And here it says, right, the salsa could use a little more spice, right? But here in this next one, it says he said as he gulped down water and wiped his eyes. So if it could use a little more spice, it means that there isn't enough spice, it is tasteless. But if he was wiping his eyes and gulping, so the water, then it means that the the, the salsa was too spicy. And if we were to choose the correct option, and then we will say that this salsa was too spicy. It was too spicy, especially since he was wiping his eyes and gulping down the water. According to Mr. Montoya's kids, his snoring is as quiet as a jackhammer. We need to identify the verbal irony in the text. It is where the speaker intentionally says something that's different from the reality of the situation. It's where the speaker says something intentionally that is different from the reality of the situation. It says, according to Mr. Montoya's kids, his snoring is as quiet as a jackhammer. All right. So according to Mr. Montoya's kids, his snoring is as quiet as a jackhammer. Doesn't mean that his snoring is subtle, or option two, the snoring is loud. And if they say, according to Mr. Montoya, his snoring is as quiet as a jackhammer, then we can say, remember a jackhammer. If we were to compare somebody's snoring to a jackhammer, then it is actually something quite loud. So if they say his snoring is as quiet as a jackhammer, then I actually think that his snoring is loud. Because remember, a jackhammer is like that drill that is extremely loud. So when it comes to an irony, right? Then remember, an irony is basically just telling you, it's where the speaker intentionally says something that is different from the reality. It's something different that you're telling us from the reality. As quiet as a jackhammer, like a jackhammer is actually loud. What does a simile in the text suggest? A simile. And we said a simile is a little device that gives human characteristics to something that isn't human. No, that's a personification. A simile. It's like we are comparing one thing to the other. It's like we're comparing one thing to the other using as. So you were as cold as ice. Simile. It's like we're comparing. You are willing to sacrifice our love. Is that option one? The song is about someone who doesn't care. Or option two, the song is about someone who's freezing. You were as cold as ice. You were willing to sacrifice our love. Is it option one, the song is about someone who doesn't care? Or option two, the song is about someone who is freezing? And if we were to identify the simile, does it mean the song is about someone who doesn't care? Or the song is about someone who is freezing? And if we were to basically compare the one thing to the other thing, then we can say the song is about someone who doesn't care. Because if you're saying someone is as cold as ice, then it means that that person don't care. Right? All right, so this is the end of our lesson on figures of speech or figurative languages. When it comes to our figurative languages, figurative languages is basically, it's almost like description language that it tells us the meaning in a way that is different from the literal meaning. So that is figurative languages we went over. Similarly, the irony, personifications, right? And so on. So we had to classify figures of speech. So this is the end of our lesson. Thank you very much for joining, and I really hope that you're going to have a good day further. So till next time, goodbye.